Hello, the title of this lecture is The Moral Majority. In 1982, one Baptist fundamentalist wrote, fundamentalists have moved out of the storefront buildings on back alleys into beautiful sanctuaries fronting the freeways and boulevards that dissect the nation's biggest cities. No longer do fundamentalists operate from the closet of inferiority, but from the parlor of influence affecting the spiritual and cultural life of America. The so called splinter group of yesterday has become a special vanguard of the truth whose influence is evidenced from the courthouse to the White House. End of quote. At mid century, a number of key fundamentalists, such as Billy Graham, began to reclaim the term evangelical. A smaller group of strict fundamentalists were unconvinced. They insisted that complete separation from any alliance with doctrinal impurity should be a test of true faith. Such separatism, however, did not stop fundamentalist deep involvement in national politics in the 1970s. In the early 1970s, a number of fundamentalists and Washington lobbyists began building an alliance. Representative of such fundamentalist political activity is Jerry Falwell's The Moral Majority. Such a development was a reaction to dramatic changes in the 1960s and 1970s. In 1962, the Supreme Court banned prayer in public school. In 1973, the Supreme Court legalized abortion. In 1964, fundamentalist organizations shed separatist and apolitical tendencies and openly supported Barry Goldwater for president. The Republicans' convincing loss was a step backward, but cultural issues in the following years prompted fundamentalists to become more political. The drug revolution, violent anti war demonstrations, the spread of pornography and notions of free love, the rise of radical feminism and gay rights were issues that upset conservative Christians who believed that traditional family values were not only biblical, but also the best path for the good of America. It was frustrating that courts removed the Bible from public life but made Playboy available at any convenience store. Fundamentalists were also upset that mainline Protestant churches were sympathetic to some of the social changes founded on liberal values. Many other ordinary Protestants had similar worries over the liberal direction that liberal clergy were taking. Convinced that mainline leaders had lost their Christian faith, many ordinary Americans left the mainline churches and shifted their support to conservative churches. Even though the population was growing, church membership at these liberal churches was dropping. Liberals viewed views liberal views common in mainland denominations were easy to see if one looked. In the case of the Methodists, 60% dismissed the virgin birth as of Christ as a biological miracle. Because of the Vietnam War, mainstream seminaries attracted dubious students seeking to avoid military duty. One commentator's assessment of the character of the mainline student body was bleak. Quote, the first thing that strikes one about the modern theological student is that he hates the church. End of quote. certainly a biased position, but it was a point that some would agree with, particularly noting how some of these people were just actually wanted to evade any participation in the Vietnam War, and this was one route that they chose. By 1967, the conservative Southern Baptists surpassed the United Methodist Church as the largest Protestant denomination in the United States. The situation worsened for mainline Protestant denominations after 1970. They lost members, money, and missionaries. Actually, they had long ago lost any zeal for evangelism, home or abroad. The election of Jimmy Carter as President of the United States in 1976 also played a role in the rise of the religious right. Many conservative Protestants were hopeful that Carter, as a Southern Baptist and self proclaimed evangelical, would fight for traditional values. It was upsetting when he instead supported the Equal Rights Amendment and homosexual rights. Fundamentalist Tim LaHaye wrote, between 1976 and 1980, I watched a professing Christian become president of the United States and then surround himself with a host of humanistic cabinet ministers. These people nearly destroyed our nation. According to scholar Clyde Wilcox, the Carter episode had two major consequences for conservative Christians. First, during the Carter candidacy, the mobilization of conservative Christians, who in the past had tended to be apolitical, demonstrated to secular political elites the existence of a new potential voting bloc. Secular conservative leaders, referred to as the New Right, began to make plans to mobilize conservative Christians and link them to Republican activism. Second, Carter had argued that Christians had an obligation to participate in politics. His message and candidacy helped change the attitudes of fundamentalists who had held that electoral politics was not the proper realm for Christian activity. Now, of course, Carter wanted Christians to back the Democrats rather than Republicans. Additional issues opened the door for greater participation by fundamentalists. Between 1965 and 1976, the rise of Christian bookstores and the sales of books by fundamentalist leaders improved communication between fundamentalists. The rise of Christian magazines resulted in better informed fundamentalists. Christian radio and television stations likewise gave fundamentalist preachers wider audiences. Changes in education caused more fundamentalists to rethink their position on public schools. Fundamentalist private schools grew rapidly in response to the changing content of public school textbooks in the area of history, politics, and sex roles. By the late 1970s, conservative Christian leaders were ready to organize. The emergence of the Christian voice and the moral majority occurred in 1979. The Christian voice was an extension of the work in California of several anti-homosexual and anti-pornography groups. Located in the West and in the South, This organization attracted those belonging to various independent fundamentalist churches. The usual strategy of the Christian Voice was to keep members informed by direct mail. Unlike the Christian Voice, the moral majority was interested in building a grassroots organization. Its founders had been approached by secular conservative leaders who promised organizational support and direct mail lists. Through the network of Bible Baptist Fellowship churches, the moral majority built state organizations. The Bible Baptist Fellowship is a loose-knit network of churches that was organized in 1950 to help local churches to labor together on evangelical and missionary activity. Improved communication by way of television and the new technology of computerized direct mail gave the moral majority and other Christian right organizations many advantages to increase membership and support. The new Christian right attracted a great amount of attention. That is, the media was very interested in what was unfolding. Baptist minister Jerry Falwell received the most attention. A little bit about Falwell. In high school, he had a 98.6% average. He scored 100% in both math and science, placed second at a statewide spelling bee, and edited the high school paper. Because he was put ahead 1 year, he finished high school at age 16. The warnings that Harvard University was inhospitable to Southern Christians deterred him from his plan to apply there for college. Close to his 17th birthday, he entered a local liberal arts school where he made the dean's list and scored the highest mark in mathematics. He transferred to Baptist Bible College in Springfield, Missouri, where he graduated as the college's top student with a degree in theology. Falwell had accepted Christ as a savior when he heard a Dr. Charles E. Fuller radio broadcast. That is the fundamentalist who had a radio ministry out of California. Falwell began studying the Bible with great earnestness. After college, he returned to his hometown of Lynchburg, Virginia, and founded the Thomas Road Baptist Church. When he began, there were just a handful of people, a handful of members of the church. But with his evangelistic zeal, the church grew very quickly. Falwell had clear views on the transformation of America's moral climate over the past decades. He believed that the generation who had experienced the Great Depression and World War II wanted to give their children things that were rare in earlier years. But when parents gave children automobiles, money, and educational opportunity without teaching a value system that made things meaningful, the young people began to rebel against the establishment. That is, rebelling against business, the job creators, and also rebelling against government, against authority. The materialism that they grew up, which had failed them, caused them to turn against their parents. At least this was Falwell's assessment. And he saw that the 1960s and 1970s represented a period of moral and spiritual decadence. There was an increase in pornography, homosexual activity, secular humanism, and divorce. In his opinion, the American Civil Liberties Union made it unpopular and undesirable to be Christian, to be religious. Falwell wanted to reverse that trend. However, the moral majority that Falwell founded was not a religious organization. More accurately, it was a political coalition of people holding to shared moral values. Falwell believed that the moral majority could not be a religious organization. Now I'll read the following quote. If we are to be effective in coalescing Americans from various religious points of view, it is important that we remain a strictly political organization. The national headquarters was in Washington, D.C. The state chapters operated on their own, only receiving advice and direction from the national headquarters. Each state chapter had its own board of directors. The national newspaper was the Moral Majority Report. The Moral Majority membership was composed of those from various religious backgrounds, including fundamentalists, Pentecostals, Roman Catholics, Jews, and Mormons. In the early 1980s, Falwell stated that membership in the moral majority can be obtained by any American who is pro-life, pro-traditional family, pro-moral, and pro-American. Under those two last tenets, we have several emphases. Under the pro-moral tenet, the moral majority took a strong position against the illegal drug traffic in the nation, against pornography, against homosexuality. But Falwell made the point, was not against homosexuals. Under the pro-American tenet, the moral majority took a stand in support of a strong national defense and unswerving support for the state of Israel. The moral majority had no membership dues. Funds came from volunteer contributions. As for Falwell, there was no connection between the moral majority and his church ministry. And this is how he explained it. I have not politicized the gospel. What I do as pastor of the Thomas Road Baptist Church and speaker of the Old Time Gospel Hour television and radio ministry is spiritual. What I do as a private citizen in the moral majority is political. As a Christian minister, I render my service unto God. As a private citizen, I render my service unto Caesar of government. End quote. The politicization of conservative Christians was a stunning development that surprised many in and outside the church. It was a significant change for Falwell and other Baptists. Baptists in the past had favored the doctrine of separation, which discouraged them from becoming involved in political action. The moral majority challenged this. Now, if one looks back in history, certainly there were fundamentalists that engaged in political action. But as far as the grassroots, as far as the rank and file church members, many of them stayed clear of politics. But the moral majority organized these people, and we see change. Those Baptists who supported the moral majority insisted that it was a political, not a religious organization, and therefore involved no violation of the principle of biblical separation. With America appearing to be closer to moral collapse, something had to be done. Those who stepped forward were called the Christian right, term I have mentioned already. The success of the Christian right in the 1980s was mixed. The Christian right raised millions of dollars and appeared to promise significant victories over secular humanism. But there were other signs that ultimate victory was unlikely. For example, from its beginnings in 1979, the moral majority benefited from the resources of Jerry Falwell's electronic ministry, from the organizational apparatus of the Baptist Bible Fellowship, and from the resources supplied by the secular right. But in 1989, Jerry Falwell was disbanding a bankrupt moral majority. As for key social issues, abortion was still legal, no public prayer was permitted in public schools, and homosexual activists continued to make gains. Certainly, there was much work for the Christian right to do as liberal thinking dominated the media and academia. A number of studies indicated that the media favored a left position on most moral, social, and political issues. Public Opinion magazine published a poll of journalists that showed that the overwhelming majority of journalists, commentators, and television anchor persons were, quote, positioned to the left of the American people. Falwell argued that media's position on abortion, pornography, and the traditional family was left of the value system held by the American public. He lamented that television shows such as The Waltons and Little House on the Prairie were rare exceptions of prime time shows that presented traditional families in a happy and loving setting. When the Coalition for Better Television approached the television networks and asked for a reversal of trends toward gratuitous sex and excessive violence, it was ignored. A more effective strategy for the Christian right was when conservative leaders approached major primetime sponsors who brought pressure on the networks to clean up their programming. In 1984, Falwell stated that, quote, all the polls indicate that the American public is turned off by the efforts of Norman Lear and others to bring Playboy-type programs to television. Entertainment Tonight recently revealed the finding of its own poll on such a subject. Overwhelmingly, the American public feels that the networks have gone too far. Although Falwell received very critical judgments from the secular press and liberal Protestants, he argued that he had no desire to force the theocracy on America. In the early 1980s, he told one interviewer the following, and I'll read this quote, which is a little long, but it's important points. It really does clarify Falwell's thinking. I believe that the American Republic was built upon the principles of the Old and New Testament, but I do not believe in a theocracy. I do not believe in a government ruled over exclusively by Christians and dominated by the Christian philosophy to the exclusion of pluralism. As a Christian who believes the Bible to be the Word of God, It is my conviction that in eternity there will be a theocracy. I believe that Jesus Christ, the Messiah, will one day rule upon the throne of David. And I believe that all true worshipers of the Messiah will spend an eternity in that very wonderful and desirable theocratic kingdom. But I do not believe that such a Christian republic will ever be established upon this earth. To attempt to develop such a government is ridiculous. We Christians and Jews who believe in the Bible can have a strong spiritual influence upon our country. We can, through our beliefs and lifestyles, inspire a very healthy climate in our society. But it must always be voluntary. It must always be spontaneous. It cannot be legislated. End quote. Falwell also made repeated clarifications that his ministry work was separate to the moral majority. This is something that I had mentioned earlier. The moral majority was not connected to his Thomas Road Baptist Church. His ministry was, however, far-reaching. As for his church, Falwell's church in the 1980s had a membership greater than 20,000 members. Quite remarkable, given that there was just a couple of dozens members when he first began. The church sponsored the Old Time Gospel Hour television and radio ministry. In 1984, Falwell claimed that his Sunday worship service was aired on approximately 400 television stations, and the Thomas Road Baptist radio ministry was heard 1/2 hour daily on approximately 500 stations across America. Falwell's church also operated 4 schools. There was the Lynchburg Christian Academy, the Liberty Baptist College, the Liberty Baptist Seminary, and the Institute for Biblical Studies. The church was involved in missions in 65 nations. Locally, the church operated the home for alcoholics in Lynchburg, which took in alcoholic men without charge for their therapeutic and spiritual ministry. There was also the Florence Crittenden Home for Unwed Mothers and the Family Center, which provided clothing and food ministry for the poor. And just a correction, that was the Elam Home for Alcoholics. By 1989, the moral majority folded. Other Christian right organizations suffered financial difficulties. According to scholar Clyde Wilcox, there were 4 major reasons why the moral majority's direct mail revenues declined sharply. And this was something that made it very difficult for the finances to continue when the direct mail setup declined. Okay, this is what Clyde Wilcox argues. First, the 1980s witnessed the success of Republicans Ronald Reagan and others. The Republicans controlled the White House from 1981 to 1993. Consequently, it was difficult to convince moral majority supporters that money was needed to save America. There was a lack of urgency or fear to encourage mail, to encourage people for giving. In 1984, Falwell stated we are pleased with the fact that Ronald Reagan has used the White House as a bully pulpit for most of the moral and social issues. He has spoken out often on issues of pornography, abortion, and the family. We could not be more pleased with the performance of the president in those areas. And President Reagan, was the only president who wrote a book in office, and the topic of that book that he wrote was abortion, and he wrote a pro-life book. Book with qualification is very small book, not many pages, but this is something that he's recognized for. He took a stand and wrote against abortion, and was providing some leadership for there being a pro-life position. Second, there were numerous conservative organizations seeking funds, resulted in saturation of the market. Many conservative organizations shared the same list of mailing names and addresses. Other groups included, for example, Focus on the Family, Concerned Women of America, and many other pro-life and anti-communist organizations. As one Christian right organizer explained, donors were deluged with requests to give. Had all these letters coming in requesting for money. Third, the Christian right suffered greatly in the media in the late 1980s. The worst year was 1987, when televangelist Jim Bakker fell from prominence due to a sexual scandal. Also, when Jimmy Swaggart was caught in the middle of a sexual scandal, and when Oral Roberts reported that God was holding him hostage, demanding a ransom, or he would be called home. There were also revelations that Christian leader Pat Robertson, who ran for president, who was running in the Republican primary, had doctored his marriage date to hide the pregnancy of his wife when they were married. And that is when the wedding took place. There were also questions about the influence of Robertson's father in keeping Pat out of the Korean War. Now, it's not as though he was alone and having problems. On the Democratic side, there were also some problems. Although Joseph Biden and Gary Hart ended their run for president for less than moral behavior, Robertson did press on. In the end, of course, he was not victorious. Instead, George Bush hung on and then went on to become president. Finally, there was also a problem with the structure of the moral majority direct mail operation. The goal of the moral majority was to build grassroots organizations at the state and then county level. It did so by building organizations around pastors of the Baptist Bible Fellowship. But the pastors were plenty busy enough with pastoral duties. Obviously, a pastor's church took priority over the moral majority. Many pastors were wary of other religious right leaders, and doctrinal differences made forging broader political coalitions difficult. Also, there were a few extreme moral majority leaders at the county level that embarrassed the movement. There was the observation that at the local level, there were those with the most extreme views were generally more willing to volunteer and the moderate, more so than the moderate members. And that meant in some cases it would be these extreme individuals who ended up taking the leadership role. Well, this probably was true in a number of cases. One additional point: some state organizations did flourish, but others failed. Without a strong state organization, it was an uphill battle for a healthy county organization. Now, according to the scholar, these were the reasons why the fortunes of the moral majority plummeted. It had raised over $11 million in 1984, but 4 years later, this figure fell to 3 million. A significant number of Americans continued to be concerned with secular issues, but there was only so much money for Christian right organizations, which experienced a number of internal shortcomings. The Christian right of the 1980s, however, was part of a larger success story. And this last image is Pat Robertson. The linkage of the Christian right with the secular new right facilitated the political conversion of white evangelical Christians to Republican politics. More conservative Christians participated in the political process, and most of their votes were for the Republican Party. And so we have then a number of fundamentalists, conservative Christians who become directly involved in politics. They run for office. Certainly the best example of that in the 80s at the federal level was Pat Robertson running for president. But elsewhere, throughout the nation, at the grassroots, we find more and more conservative Christians looking to represent the values of their constituencies, the ones who believe that there needed to be a rethinking on some key social issues. And so the 80s, we see this, we reach a point where conservative Christians are very much involved in the political system. Thank you.